Hey, thank you for stopping by, Brian, for Liberty. I do appreciate it. If you haven't taken the time, please hit like, subscribe, share the content. Trying to grow the channel here. And if you like what I have to say, I certainly would appreciate you helping me grow. I am going to be talking today about what's going on in Portland, Oregon. We are seeing that there's an agreement reached here with the governor of Portland to get federal troops out of Portland in lieu of the governor deploying state troopers into Portland to defend the federal courthouse from the protesters. And we got to stop just saying protesters, from the rioters. Governor Kate Brown accused the Trump administration of political theater in deploying federal troops into Portland. But quite frankly, the accomplishment of getting the governor to finally admit that there's an issue here and to get state troopers into Portland to protect this federal courthouse and hopefully start quelling some of the violence that's taking place there is actually a positive step. And I think that President Trump showed a great deal of restraint in dealing with Portland and some of what's going on in the other major cities in this country by waiting so long to deploy federal troops. I mean, let's face it, in Portland, we've been looking at 8 weeks of violence. Portland's federal courthouse has been under siege. There's been fires. There's been fireworks fired at police. There's been fireworks fired at buildings. This violence from Portland is spreading into places like Eugene, Oregon. And quite frankly, it was beyond time for something to be done. The federal government has very limited capacity in terms of dealing with local law enforcement, enforcing law at the local level. So by deploying troops into Portland to protect the federal courthouse, it drew a lot of attention to the violence that was actually taking place there and kind of forced the governor's hand. And Kate Brown had no choice but to send these troops into Portland, or not troops, I should say, state troopers into Portland. And that's a good thing. And the bottom line is, if she wants to accuse President Trump of political theater, then I would make that accusation right back, because I don't think there's any scenario under any other circumstance where a political leader is going to allow a city like Portland to get torn apart by rioters unless the goal is to pander to a particular voting bloc. And let's face it, Oregon, Portland, these are very Democrat strongholds. These are far left areas. And right now, political leaders in these places feel like Black Lives Matter and the far left have control. And all they're looking to do is win in the upcoming election. That's it. Whether it's Portland, Minneapolis, Chicago, New York, LA, all these places are Democrat strongholds. All these places are being co-opted by the far left. That's what you're seeing on the news. And these political leaders just want to win. It is just political theater, because I can guarantee you this. If a group of White Lives Matter or All Lives Matter or any group not affiliated with the far left and BLM were doing the exact same thing, these political leaders would not have sat back for weeks and allowed the violence to continue. They would have intervened immediately to stop it. So it is political theater. Maybe it's political theater on the part of Donald Trump. Maybe it's political theater on the part of Kate Brown. It's probably a little bit of both. But the bottom line is the violence in Portland had to stop. It had to be stopped. And it took a federal deployment in order to make that happen. Let's hope that the state troopers come in and they can slow down this violence. Now, the mainstream media has tried to sell the Portland protests as mostly peaceful, but the only way to do that is to actually change the definition of what a peaceful protest is. Let's face it, in Portland, we've had people blocking traffic. That's not a peaceful protest. We've had people firing off fireworks. That's not peaceful protest. We've had people starting fires, tearing down barricades. None of this stuff is peaceful protesting. And the bottom line is that this had to be stopped. So I'm glad to see that an agreement was reached. I'm actually, as a libertarian, I'm glad to see that the federal troops are leaving. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of federal officers being deployed in local communities, actively deployed, because they're there. There's local FBI field officers, there's local FBI, DHS, TSA, all these federal agencies exist throughout the country, and that concerns me as a libertarian as well. But I'm glad to see that the active deployment of these troops in a place like Portland is ending, and local authority is taking control back. I'm very happy about that. And if you fear big government like I do as a libertarian, then you want your local authorities. You want a Kate Brown to make sure that a place like Portland is safe and that the federal government doesn't have a reason to inject itself or put itself into the situation. So again, the dereliction of duty by these local politicians led to this. But I want to talk about something else as well. And the Black Lives Matter protests are continuing across the country. I have been outspoken in my opposition to the movement itself. Not just the organization, but the actual movement. I've said for weeks that this is going to harm more black people than it's ever going to help. And if we look at the crime statistics across the country, here's just a little photo of the increase in violent crime, particularly in murders at places like Minneapolis, Chicago, New York, LA, all the places that you would expect to see this kind of violence unfortunately happen. And there's massive increases in the homicide rates compared to last year. And this is the result. When we talk about what went on in Portland and local law enforcement being pushed out and federal law enforcement having to come in, you're seeing the same thing across all these other cities. They're pushing out local law enforcement. And who do you think are the victims of this increased violence, of this increase in the murder rate? Who do you think is being affected by this in Minneapolis, in Chicago, in LA, in New York? Who do you think? These are literally black lives that are being lost because of a misguided movement against the police department. Because we're going to take a small number of there are racist police. I'm not making an argument that there's not, but we're going to take that small percentage. We're going to take the small percentage in terms of the impact on the black community. It's a tiny percent when you talk about the thing that happened to George Floyd. That's a tiny, tiny percent of what actually goes on in terms of policing. It's almost statistically insignificant. It doesn't make the individual events any less tragic. But the bottom line is when you look at a 95% increase in homicide rates in a city like Minneapolis, who do you think the victims of these crimes are? Who do you think's being killed? The increase in homicide rates in all these different cities is going to far outweigh the number of black lives that are lost at the hands of police by a wide margin. And if we care about black lives, then how can we know what the result of pushing the police out is going to be? You could look back to 1980 and look at the homicide rates prior to the increased police presence, prior to stop and frisk and all these things that we hate and I hate as a libertarian. And deploying additional police wasn't the right policy decision at the time. We should have decriminalized drugs. We should have focused on treatment and rehabilitation, and we didn't. We focused on policing, and that was a mistake. But you've got to solve the problem of the drug war before you can start pushing back against the police, because right now black lives are being lost because of the misguided movement of pushing out the police first. Pushing out the police, reducing the size of the police force, all these different things have to happen after we eliminate the policy that requires all these police to be on the street. If we're doing things in the wrong order, we are going to lose more black lives, not save black lives. And that is the problem. You don't get to sit and name your organization Black Lives Matter and then act in direct conflict with that. Because what you're doing is you're justifying every single racist who says all lives matter, white lives matter, or anything like that, who say that from a racist place. You're proving them right. You're proving to them that you don't really care about black lives either, that you're really just an organization out there to spread divisiveness. So we really have to start working on policy in these places. We really have to look at drug laws before we start pushing back against the police. If we care about black lives, that's what absolutely has to be done. So I just wanted to drop in here again, put out a quick video. Please, if you like my content, take a second to subscribe, like it, share it, so we can get this channel growing and hopefully bring another voice to talk about liberty, to talk about how we're going to solve these actual problems. Like I said, we're trying to push back against the idea that we need to eliminate police first. We're trying to push back against the divisiveness of this, what I think is a largely ineffective movement of Black Lives Matter, a movement that is going to cost more black lives than it's going to save. And I'm going to keep putting that message out there. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking about MASK, Mothers Against Senseless Killing. This is an organization in Chicago that's actually doing quite a bit of good. And there's a documentary that's recently been released. Tomorrow I'm going to have the trailer for that documentary on the channel and just talk a little bit about what they've been doing and share the story of Mothers Against Senseless Killing on here. So please subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss that. On Sunday, I'm going to be going over chapters 5 and 6 of Thomas Sowell's amazing work, Basic Economics. I've been working and reading on that, taking notes and preparing for that show all week. So please don't miss that. And I appreciate you stopping by. And as always, I will see you next time.